Hey, Phil. There's a moment in every founder's life where the math stops making sense and the spreadsheet starts lying to them. Today, we're going to talk about exactly that moment. I'm Josh Notes, across the table, business partner and co host Phil Maffei. He's the CFO. I'm the founder who's been bankrupt and built back from it. Okay. And today, we're going to make the numbers speak so that you can stop hiding from them. This is Financial Clarity Live. And today, our topic is the death of the annual budget. Phil, you've seen this death occur over your career of the last 25 years, and you've also seen what founders are using to win instead. I know we've talked about this, in a way, but usually we've come from the forecasting side. Let's flip this around today and tell the audience, maybe the one thing that is the most misconceived about a budget.
The one thing that's most misconceived about a budget. Uh, I think the one probably, probably the fact that it becomes pretty obsolete pretty quickly. I think a lot of time and energy gets spent on these things, especially in big corporations where a lot of alignment across a lot of the different departments is required to, get everyone to agree to what the budget is, right? So I think there's a lot of time and energy wasted on something that's ultimately obsolete relatively quickly.
Yeah, I feel like it's like trying to like time and plan your funeral or something. I don't know. Like and get the entire company around it. You'd be shocked at how many people still use the word. I don't think it's dead really yet because it's still being used, and a lot of organizations are still actively gravitating around it. But obviously, we're in the camp of financial modeling and forecasting. And as we start to dive in, would you do me a favor and tell me when I say something that's wildly wrong?
You got it, pal, as always.
All right. So just, a brief history lesson for anyone out there who came to learn. Annual budget was built for really maybe your grandparents' world. Before computers were in every workstation, now in your hand, in your pocket, but there was these more predictable market rates, long-term product cycles. Obviously, there was this world where a lot of people would go and get a job and work at the same place for maybe even their entire career. But this annual planning cycle could actually survive back then, right? Especially when things were more stable. And boards demanded a plan. They had to be printed out on actual paper. And the CFO had to deliver it. And then it kind of held. But now we're seeing a world that has a ton of rapid change, right? We've got the Fed moving things multiple times a year. Customer behavior is shifting, as rapidly as AI is advancing. Supply chain shocks are occurring across the world. And most founders, knowingly or unknowingly, rewrite their annual budget by up to 50% by the time you get to quarter two. So, but they keep calling it the budget. So why do you think they're doing that? And what do you think we could convince them to change that by changing their perspective today on the show?
Yeah, I think the context that we're using here, right? I think budgets in particular, in isolation and in particular circumstances, the idea of some static number for a long period of time makes sense, right? So like you think about like if you're compensating a salesperson, maybe you would call it a quota, maybe not a budget, but it's the same kind of thing where it's we're not going to change it on them as the year goes on, and we agree on it once, and they go out and go after it, right? Or it's like, hey, you're going on a trip next week. This is your budget for that trip, right? You can spend $1,000, right? Like that. In that context, it makes sense. And I think what this is also a function of that's maybe not represented on this slide is just the technological advancements that have enabled revisiting this process more frequently and more efficiently. Where in the old good old days when you're doing things with pen and paper and handwriting it, so to speak, right? It's going through this exercise is very cumbersome and it's while it's useful, it takes up a lot of time and energy and we used to run reports and then go have lunch and the tools still hadn't been done populating them by the time we got back, half hour, 45 minutes later, right? Versus today, everything happens real time in a cloud-based fashion. So I think there's been a huge shift in the way the finance teams work that enable a more dynamic process to be even more possible now than it was 50, 60 years ago.
Right, right. It's not just the world has changed, the tech's changed, even people have changed, right? Where you might not have some of the people that were on the team when the budget was set, a couple quarters ago, depending on shifting, growth or downsizing. Um, so I'm framing this not as a finance problem, but an ego problem. Um, See if you agree. I know you'll tell me if you disagree. So the reason the annual budget refuses to die is somebody's there from when it used to be a thing. We've always done it this way. The board expects it this way. The auditors prefer it. Somebody is behind the scenes kind of asking about the budget and by that name. Um, Two is it protects the CEO from truth. The updates that occur in our variance versus reality sessions that we run with all of our clients every month. You only get audited 12 months later, so you're kind of consequence free for 95% of the time. And then the third one being that, if you update this thing monthly, your team is seeing you're wrong. And I know this is uncomfortable for those that lead with confidence, but we view it a little bit differently. So, tell me how we could flip this ego thing on its head. You've got a background in philosophy.
Yeah, I think it's not that it's maybe, it gets, kind of the way I look at it is your budget is just your forecast as of, kind of the beginning of the year, right? So, it's useful for, setting bonus targets, and we alluded to like the sales quota conversation, right? It frames all of those different metrics because they all need to work together in harmony, right? Your sales team's quotas all need to add up to a number that usually exceeds what your sales target is for the year. And that way, if everyone hits your individual number, we collectively hit our number in the aggregate, right? And those are the types of things where like having a line in the sand at one point in time, you need to do, right? If you and I are getting bonused on what our profitability is at the end of this year, right? And you're kind of working towards that, to have someone change that on you halfway through the year is a little disingenuous. So there's certain corner cases where that one frame of reference at the beginning of the year is useful. But where I think it comes down to the strategic decision making, and as you alluded to earlier, how quickly things change, adjusting your assumptions in light of, fast moving business is important for, real strategic tactical decision making, right? Your plan is not a great decision tool 6-12 months after you've got done building it, right? You need to revisit that process, as efficiently as you can and identify the trends that are meaningful so that, you kind of all the old Mike Tyson quote, right? Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the teeth. So it's like the planning portion is important, but you need to real time update that and the consequences of those punches in the teeth that are bound to happen to everybody as the year goes on.
Got to be bobbing and weaving. I love it.
Like a butterfly.
No, I mean, look, I've been at the head of that table of a dying enterprise, and I can tell you it was definitely my ego that was avoiding distributing accountability across the team regarding the numbers. And I think if we did it, we wouldn't have had that different of an outcome because the business model sucked, frankly. But it would have been, at least we would have grown our organization and our development of our team members to a higher level instead of kind of hiding behind more of this kind of budgeting concept and doing the rolling forecast behind the scenes in only an executive arena. But so out there, if you're listening and you're updating your monthly forecast and it feels like a confession, that's you protecting your ego. I think you're not protecting your business. Let me tell you from truth, from experience. And I think, look, it starts with permission. It starts with permission to be wrong, to understand that a forecast is not about perfection. It's about a process. We talk about it almost every week here, and we talk about it every single day in our business, Sustained CFO. So I know, Phil, the 13-week rolling forecast is more of an industry term, not exactly what we do because we have more of a longer-term view that goes out more than 13 weeks. But I think most people can think in this kind of 90-day cycle and understand how it gets refreshed and how it works. So can you at least explain the mechanics of it, even if we're not, standing up and saying, hey, we're going to do this for you week one when you work with us?
Yes, I think two different objectives here, right? We talk about a budget or a rolling forecast and then a 13-week cash forecast, right?
Okay.
So this is a lot more of a granular view of the world, owned by the people who are responsible for, right, paying the bills and cutting the checks and going out and collecting the receivables. So this is very much a finance exercise in the sense that you need to manage all of those activities and have a clear view of any gaps from a cash flow perspective in the short term, right? So think about all your open bills and all your open invoices and the cash you have in the bank and the dynamics of all of these things you should have a line of sight on so that you never find yourself in a position where you don't have any cash in the bank to meet some of those obligations, right? So this is a usually led by the finance team exercise in the sense of all of the decisions have already been made, right? Like you've already signed the contracts and you've received the bills, right? You've already sent the invoices, and it's a an operational exercise in managing the cash flow in the short term as a result of that, right? So
Okay.
that's that's what we're talking about here. It's just a rolling 13-week view of the world where you're just kind of saying, hey, if I've got some amount of money in the bank, I've got these cash obligations, I expect to collect some amount, I'll have this much at the end of the week, and so on and so forth. And it's a good exercise for anyone to do who's got tight cash flow cycles and complex AR and AP timing type of activity going on.
Yeah, and when we talk about this from a blocking and tackling perspective and like literally packaging this into a month, including holidays, including vacations, right? There's some version of what you see here in the middle of the screen with an update occurring as soon as possible, as soon as the calendar turns, a consolidation occurring, as soon as that's done, right? A build out that's already been designed from a bottoms up drivers based perspective, and then decisions that can be gotten to as soon as possible, so you're not already a month behind when you're making improvements or iterations. So that's the idea of this. I don't think we need to hit it any harder on this session. We've hit it so many times. But now we're talking about this forecast, this rolling forecast process that lives not just in the owner's head. I know we were talking about this yesterday with a client, and we're talking about, hey, we got to get this out of your head and distributed across the team for accountability. So these are just some of the folks: head of sales, head of ops, head of people, CFO, CEO, that all need a view of this. Phil, how do we actually do this, and how long does it take?
Well, it's it's getting everyone in the same room and having the head of the business be self-aware enough to know that they can't monitor everything all the time, and they have to have people around them that they trust that own these critical components of the business, finance being one of them, right? So we do this by getting everyone in the same room, right? Kind of usually working with the leader at first, figuring out who they want to be a part of this process. But then I can't tell how many times the head of operations or the head of sales wasn't even sure what the revenue targets for the year were, right? So there's a level of visibility that once everyone is on the same page, decisions happen more quickly, more succinctly, right? Everyone's aware of the implications of said decisions. And then ultimately, as the person who runs the business, you're able to hold your team accountable to objective data and not just, feel good metrics around some obscure thing that may or may not move the business, right? So,
Yeah.
it takes as long as, answering your question with a question as always, as complex as the business is, but, within, call it 90 days, you can certainly be in a place where, you're getting into this process, getting into the rhythm of having these strategic finance based conversations with people who own the numbers and you can hold them accountable, right? That's, I think, the ideal client finds the value in this process.
Yeah, and I think the key, you mentioned it, kind of ties back to that ego component, is like the owner has to let go of feeling like they're the only one who can make these decisions. If they won't do that, they are probably subconsciously blocking growth and sabotaging their own vision of execution. We see it a lot. It happens kind of around these, I'm going to call it like round zero numbers, meaning when you get to $1 million, have you figured it out? When you get to 10 million bucks, have you figured it out? When you got to 20 million bucks, these every time the company kind of doubles, it seems like it needs to be reinvented, but it also needs to be redistributed back to the organization. Cool. So this isn't just a big company discipline. We know this because we work with small businesses, medium-sized businesses every day. Usually they're in that 5 to 20 million range in revenue. When we find them, we meet them where they're at and we help them get to the next level. Here we have this kind of visual, looks pretty fun, of where things started. A lone founder sitting by himself. I've actually been that guy at the chair with all the paperwork and the calculator. My dog was sitting next to me, but otherwise it was exactly like that picture. And then crisis hits, and I'm making these decisions on my own. Definitely not advisable. Rolling forecast. This one looks like a video game arcade. Everybody's working together, looking at the screen. Cash crises are predicted months early. Real decisions are made with the investor in mind. Maybe this is a little too simplified, but why do we think that small businesses need this even more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think your financials are the language of your business, and ignore them at your own peril. But it's more possible now than ever, right? I think that's probably the biggest misconception, or just lack of awareness that most of the folks we talk to is they don't know that this is a thing, right? They think it's reserved for the Microsofts and bigger companies in the world. When in reality, there is a way to run this process at a scale that meets you where you are and can scale with you, right? And that previous slide, maybe you don't have 6 executives you need to be a part of the process. Maybe it's just 2 or 3 key individuals, right? And it's
Sure.
just a function of where you are, and being able to scale accordingly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's this other view that maybe wasn't here 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but now it's like, oh, I've got Claude or I've got ChatGPT. So I can just talk to that and that'll be my sounding board. Tell me why that one's not likely to work out.
Yeah. I mean, you got to realize that the sources of data that it's scraping, right? It's like, when as soon as you trust it to make a management decision, you probably got a problem, right? I think it's a tool that it's a tool we use. It's a tool that everyone should be using, right? For where it makes sense. But what we always talk about and what we do is going to be the last thing to be replaced, because you can hold a person accountable. I don't know that Claude's going to be messes something up and you lose a deal because of it. It's not losing when you sleep at night, right? You can't go back and fire it. Maybe you could stop using it and get back to having half a clue and actually reviewing the information it's giving you, right? So I think it's a tool there. This has the Excel spreadsheet revolutionized finance, right? Now tools that go in there and help you without having to be an Excel wizard like yours truly to be able to get to the same outcomes, right? I think all of these things are good and advances in the right direction, but let's not confuse data aggregation and reporting for strategic decision making and accountability, right? I think that's where,
Yeah.
I don't know of any computers that are capable of that portion of it yet.
At least not yet. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great mirror, right? It reflects back to you what you give it, and it can give you an honest look. It can also kind of pump you up, as a great mirror can do, make you feel a little tighter on the belt line than actually stands. But it's not like if you look in that mirror and then you're like, all right, I'm going out to play in a basketball game, and you roll out on the court and you're still facing 5 other people. You're still one dude with a mirror. So keep working on that. All right. Keeping it moving and looking at kind of this transformation from the annual budget to rolling forecast in 90 days. So let's say, hypothetically, you haven't met sustained CFO, you're still in the annual budget. You watch this episode and you're like, oh, that's what I needed. I need this sign from the universe of YouTube to tell me that this is what I need to do. So one, again, you got to give yourself permission to be wrong, permission for it to not be that accurate out of the gates. I find this kind of similar to like teaching kids, let's say sports, and they're like, I'm talking like young single digit age kids, and you start teaching them something, and they're like, I know, and you're like, okay, well, go ahead and show me, and they show you, and okay, and if you do this, it might help you a little bit, and then they do it, but with a bad attitude, and then they're like, see, I told you it wasn't going to work, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, you're right. So I think if you have a right attitude about this, it can work. It can work in 90 days. It can maybe work even a little bit quicker, but it's not going to work that much faster than that. Right. So you talk about these cycles, these monthly cycles, and then the process that's going to iterate on that monthly cycle. I don't know, grab one of these X's here and tell me about you've seen somebody run down that road and why it's not a good idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think maybe important to elaborate what you just pointed out, right, is where, over 90 days, you really get 3 cracks at a monthly finance cycle of closing the books and all of that good stuff, right? So, it's impossible to do it in one cycle, and usually 2 or 3 is what it's going to take. So that's that 60 to 90 day framework we're always talking about, and we talk about this a lot, but I think it's a function of holding, someone besides yourself accountable and making it a true process across, your organization, and not something that happens, in the background, that's not distributed to, the folks who are on the ground responsible for, making the business run on a day-to-day basis, right? So it's critical to have those people, you know, in the conversation, right? To some degree, and that's going to be looking different again for everybody. So that's where the customization comes in. But to think that, as you keep saying, to think that you could do this yourself in a large organization is just not realistic.
Right. But, keep it in mind, don't give yourself permission to run both these systems forever, because then you're going to have these parallel paths that are diverging, not converging. And don't accept, I don't have the data. Like, that's okay, maybe like month one, but month two, like, you've had 30 days, figure out where that information is, estimate it, but don't tell me you don't have the data. That's not an answer. All right. Rocking here for the finish. Here's what it looks like if you're watching this and you want to put this process in place right now. So first question is, when was your forecast last updated with current month actuals? If it's been more than 60 days, you don't have a forecast. Okay. It's stale. And it's not going to really work unless you get it into a 30-day cycle. Who else on your team owns a piece of the forecast? If the answer is just me, well, look in the mirror, point at the person who the problem stands with, and not the numbers, and then work on distribution. If your organization is only you, well, then you can keep forecasting things just yourself. But if it's not going to grow beyond you, I don't know, like, call me, tell me about that, how that's going to get beyond where you're at now to your vision. Number 3, could an investor look at your forecast today and trust it? If not, what would need to change before you hand it over? And I think it's like, maybe how will this stand 90 days from now too? If they look back at it, are you really sure that not only they can look at this now, but like in perpetual motion? And then lastly, what does 2 more years of annual budgets actually cost you? We say over here, hopium has a price tag and it compounds. So let's be honest here. Block out 60 minutes with your CFO or yourself or Claude or whoever, and sketch your 13-week rolling forecast. Assign 3 owners, even if you got to spin your hat around 3 times, and then get that first 30-day cycle in motion. Phil, final word. What do you got? What do we miss? And what should people out there make sure they do if they put this in place next week?
I don't think it's reminding yourself that it's not going to be perfect the first time you try to do it, right? This is a muscle that you've got to develop. It's a process, not above anything else, right? So the most important thing is to just start and continue to refine and make it better.
There you go. Speaking the truth. Well, we always like to say the numbers don't lie. They just don't tend to speak unless someone updates them every 30 days. So that's our encouragement to you. And we want to thank you. Thank you for joining us on the show. Reminder, if you're interested in getting help and doing it, like, I don't know, how about now? Here's your signal from the universe. Get your financial clarity right now. Take a picture of this QR code. That will give you 15 questions to fill out. You'll meet me on the other side in a one-on-one meeting, and we'll figure out where your business is at and help you take it to the next level. If you like what you heard, join our newsletter, Finance in Focus, for weekly financial tips, updates, and Q&A from the episode. And then go ahead and check us out next week, 3 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to air our next episode and help you gain